With the AUC, I have a relation starting from 2002. Myself was teaching here 2005, 2007 at the International Comparative Politics Department, ICP department. And in that time, we were sitting in an old building, former Communist Party building under the Marx, Engels, and Lenin in the conference room. And we, AUCA, moved to a new building. And this is more appropriate for American liberal art college, so comparing that building. My presentation about can European Union be as an example of Eurasian integration? Of course, my view is more related political science view, and is there any connection? Is there can be a sample for Eurasian Union? First, as we know, Europe kind of a showcase example of the successful regional integration. Regional integration of Europe made extensive economic development and democratization possibly in the politically fragile environment and weak economies of the East European countries. So in that sense, European Union providing kind of a political stable democracy. Sorry, where should I push?
Just forward.
Okay. Yeah. So all countries within the European Union have kind of political stable democracies and certain level, more or less, prosperous market economies. And more important, these European Union countries have continuing peace with each other. If you look the history, what kind of conflict they had previously. So European Union kind of providing atmosphere for those countries to having peace and cooperating and solving their problem. The question is an example, is European Union an example for Eurasian integration? Of course, this question more also related, not just political issues, economic view too. So I will talk about that one. My research question, I have two research questions. What were the conditions that made regional integration possible in Europe? So if we understand basically Europe, then we can understand what kind of steps the Eurasian countries should follow. Or are those conditions present in Eurasia now? So those conditions can we see in Eurasian region? Finally, is regional integration possible any region, or is it specific only to some regions like European Union and NAFTA, certain level, economic level? Before I start talking about theoretical framework, I want to clarify Eurasia. I'm not taking the Eurasia a broad sense. I'm taking the Eurasia countries who are already member of Eurasian Economic Union. So it's not the broader sense, more narrow sense today what the Russian, Kazakhs, Belarus, and the Kyrgyz understand. Theoretical framework, I will not much go over the theoretical framework, but there are different theories in economics and in politics developed to understand unions. Of course, when we are talking unions, this is economic unions, later political unions, before free trade zone, then custom union, common market, single market, economic union, and political union. So the cooperation level from starting from trade zone to end with the political union. So if you see the European history, European Union history, we can see this is first started free trade zone and then the extended level. So the subject of union start research on by the economists and the political science starting from 1950s. First they concentrated on the custom unions theories, and because of the custom union is the basically to the beginning stage of the integration. In political science, the political science field, functionalism, neo-functionalism, federalism, intergovernmentalism, trying to explain why the state are cooperate, and this cooperation they take from up to political union, and they try to explain the regional unions, and in that sense. So economic theory of integration is more emphasized on the division of labor, economic division of labor, through specialization and cooperation, different companies, cooperation in the member of the countries. Political science concepts of integration have a different approach, mainly more emphasized on the purpose and values, which is the previous presenter, some of the previous presenter mentioned about it. Basically, I will use transactionalism and communicational theory. Transactionalism puts more emphasis on the intensity of the cooperation and relation as a lever for security community, especially Karl Deutsch is mentioning. And that security community, which is yesterday, I think Diana has mentioned that one, security community. So consequently for integration. So using the security community concepts to make the countries come together. Today also mentioned security issues may bring the countries together and act together. Probably you provided comment in the previous panel. So transactionalism, that's the one mistake there, emphasizes on common or mutual interests of different social, economic, political institution actors and the groups. So it's not only states, but inside the states there are actors, which is the social, economic, and political groups. They also should have a common and mutual interest that make them to push their countries and leadership to accept intensify the cooperation and then establish the union. So mutual dependency, mutual interest, making the countries to cooperate and establish union. So regional integration as a concept, as I mentioned, Deutsch concept I am using, regional integration means increasing and closer level of interaction among group of states that are located in close to each other, other distance or situation on one region. And also, this can be only happen is bottom-up approach. I mean, as I mentioned, political, economic, and social groups within the country push their leadership to initiate or start or to part of the cooperation, and of course, at the end, integration. Private sector and various trade organization, union, facilitate the institutionalization and integration process. So this we may call the spillover effect. So spillover effect happened not just economically, but also political way. So that spillover effect, political and economic spillover effect, promote regional integration. Economic spillover presumes that economic cooperation further leads to even more closer economic cooperation and later economic integration. So if the country is close economic cooperation, there is even bigger need for cooperation, and that is creating, which we can define as the economic spillover. Need supranational authority, which is the more political sense. Integration promote growth of interest groups, that business people, workers, trade unions, and also some political groups, which they have common interests, business and political and social common interests. So these interest groups unite to lobby their common interests, creating common policies and regulation that will make the trade, cooperation, having the mutual political interest easier to conduct. This turn and necessitate greater need to creating a supranational organization, institution, which can play a role of to distribute or to bring the different groups together. So supranational institution emerged, creating an environment which a national government is not, cannot afford or cannot provide the protection and opportunities to those groups. So very simply, if we define the condition for integration, this first, those countries who wants to integrate economic and politically, first they need to have pluralistic social structure, social and political structure. Then they need to have this substantial economic and industrial development, and they need to have common ideology or approach patterns among the participant units, not just only state or the within the states, groups, and economic society. Then, if you look at these three conditions of integration, then look the European Union in European integration, we can say that the European had this three conditions to start the early cooperation, later turn the political one. First, Europe was more or less religiously, culturally homogeneous. Second is the European countries had shared a common goal, becoming advanced capitalist democracy. It means that their economic model also more or less is competitive. Of course, the idea of united Europe is not just the last century's idea. The idea of the united Europe is starting from 16th century, at least, we can say, the uniting Europe. So this is, we can find the great thinkers' ideas, Kant, Montesquieu, Erasmus, Voltaire, among the philosophers or thinkers promoted united Europe. Of course, they have the different way, I mean, they mention in different way. For example, Kant more mentioned common principle norms which the European civilization sharing. Then question, how about Eurasian integration or Eurasian at the end, Eurasian Union? First, even though they have common history being part of the Soviet Union and common understanding of among the especially ruling elite, certain age group, today I think Svetlana mentioned, they are becoming older. So those elites who educated during the Soviet time, and they have Soviet men or Soviet understanding. But they have also some problems there. However, due to national revival, so these Eurasian countries, they want to emphasize on their national identity to nation building process. They emphasizing not the commonalities, but they are emphasizing on the more differences, and they are different. They see, they want to their nation and the state different than their neighboring state. For example, as a part of nation building in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, differences rather than similarities between Kyrgyz and Kazakh cultures, culture, history, and not the religious culture and history is mentioned, emphasized. In Kyrgyz, Kazakh culture is not really much difference, even the language. But if you look in that sense, okay. And second thing is the different economic models, which is Central Asian, Eurasian countries following, and different economic models and inequality in speed of reforms in the countries Eurasia is a condition that to prevent the Eurasian countries to integrate each other and functionally work functionally work together. So that is the preventing the different economic interest groups to working together to emphasizing or pushing their government to having a bottom-up policies to support the integration. And these differences, economic differences, may come to depends on the resources which these countries depend on. For example, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, they are resource-rich countries, certain level. Uzbekistan more agriculture, the other is more natural resources. And Kyrgyzstan, along with the Tajikistan, that have fairly few natural resources to be attractive to the investment. So this is affect the countries, Eurasian countries, really to integrate each other. Political terms, as we can take example again from Central Asian countries, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and certain level Kazakhstan, we can say that they are authoritarian regime. But while poor Kyrgyzstan is the island of democracy, so how can different political system, how we can combine them to establish, integrate each other? So this is the also one of the problematic area. Then the question is: the EU is a sui generis example? Is not. But basically, if we answer that question, it's not. But regional integration is not possible any region if certain conditions are not fulfilled by the actors. When I mentioning actors, I'm not just talking about the state, but within the state, different interest group, social, economic, and political interest group. First, the societies of those countries, states need to have pluralistic social structure, demands coming from the bottom. Second is substantial economic and industrial development. And the third is the common ideology or common understanding, civilizational understanding, which is in the morning session talking about the constructivism, identity, how identity shaping our understanding of the political and international relations. So at least they need to have the common ideological patterns or common sense of the common civilizational identity among the participant units, actors. The last things I want to mention about, of course, today Eurasian Economic Union established, but this kind of organization established in post-Soviet region, starting from early 1990s to this time, but they become dysfunctional. One of them is still alive, but is not function. Its assumed goal is the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS. So, in that sense, Eurasian Economic Union cannot turn as a political union, which is the Putin is preferred to have, and economic to keep the economic union also need this social and economic interest group within these countries should feel that they have common and mutual interest within this structure. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Okay, thank you. So we'll now collect some questions from the floor. I already see at least 3 hands up. So let's take these 3 together. You please introduce yourself and please also indicate who your question is addressed to.
My name is Rahul. I belong to Afghanistan, and I'm doing my master in OAC Academy Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And my question is, first I have to give a comment regarding Professor Sanjay Pandey's presentation. First, it was good presentation. So we can say that, as Professor Sari presented, that is regional integration possible in any region? And short answer, I can say no. Why? Because we have different social structure in South Asia. We have different different political views. which is two nuclear powers, Pakistan and India. And this is even a minor clash between the states inhibit or hinder the economic integrations. I can give examples. There is one blame game from Pakistan against India, India against Pakistan, and again from Afghanistan toward Pakistan. So first, this is one thing. And my question will be that what do you suggest as you as a political analyst, as you suppose you are Indian officials, so how do you suggest to make SARC an effective organizations as compared to ASEAN, as compared to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as compared to recently Eurasian Economic Union? So what do you suggest to make these unite?
Next question. You wanted to, yeah. And then you, Vadim.
Thank you for the speakers. I have a question for Sanjay. And concerning your perspective about deepened economic cooperation between India and Pakistan, I think that it could be a good thing, but I think that in my perception, in your scenario, you don't take the role of China, because there is a strong strategic partnership between China and Pakistan, and China is playing to boycott, maybe a rapprochement between India and Pakistan. Only two instances. The first one is that Pakistan is one of the pairs of the so-called stringing pairs of strategy, or the maritime Silk Route. Because Pakistan is a key to bypass Malacca in order to divert energy, oil and gas to China. The second point is that China is working to develop the Iran-Pakistan gas pipeline, and if this project will be realized, I think that the other project which involve India, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline should downplay its relevance in the region. So, and I would like to know your opinion about that. I think that only if China and India work together in the regional framework, it is possible to rapproch Pakistan and India and also China in a wider regional framework. Thank you.
Thank you. Vadim, and then then we will give a chance for the panelists to answer. Yeah, yeah.
My question would be to Mr. Yasar Sari. I remember one thing now, maybe now we have 2015, maybe 5 years ago, when I started to study the Eurasian Economic Union. At that time it was, I think, even Eurasian or Customs Union. Nobody in the West was speaking about this, and nobody expected that now we will have Eurasian Economic Union. And at best, experts, and even some experts in Russia were speaking, oh, we will never have Eurasian Economic Union, it will be the same fate as of this. And now we are comparing already European Union and Eurasian Economic Union. So my question is, we have it in place, and here we in last slide we see regional integration is not possible in any region if we don't have the condition, and we see that Eurasian Economic Union actually doesn't have these conditions. So what your prediction for Eurasian Economic Union? And my last note is that Crimea came suddenly and unexpectedly. So I think very big mistake sometimes in the West is that the West doesn't expect from Russia the things they get in the end. So from my point of view, we should expect that, at least expect and think about the possibility that Eurasian Economic Union can develop and have the perspective. And from your presentation, it is possible to understand that it has no future. So what's your position? Because I wouldn't prefer to have Crimea come unexpectedly again.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll let the panelists answer, and then we'll take the next bundle of questions. Yeah?
Thank you very much. My co-panelist, Dr. Yasser Sareen, very rightly said that there are certain preconditions or requirements for regional integration, and one of the preconditions he mentioned was a certain civilizational or ideological unity among the member states, which exists in case of EU, as you very rightly said. But whether it exists in Eurasia, that is a question. Of course, yesterday also there were presentations about this idea of Eurasianism, Eurasistva, whether that can be a uniting idea. And many of the countries in this region have long debated, and Russia is not the only one. Kazakhstan, Olza Suleymanov. And he wrote something 30 years back, 35 years back, in which he tried to show that how the Turkic and the Slavic civilization, there is this medieval tale of Igor's campaign, adventures of Prince Igor. And he says that the original version of that had many Turkic words. But in the early 18th century, after Peter's reforms in Russia, once Russia started to westernize, Europeanize itself and try to redefine its identity as a European country, there was a conscious effort to exclude the Turkic influence or Turkic words. So what I'm trying to say, there is a historical link and continuity even in this part of the world. And in fact, Olza Suleymanov was at that time not punished, but he was reprimanded by the Communist Party, by the Soviet Union of Writers, and but later on, so these ideas are there, that there is a certain unity between the Slavic and the Turkic people of Eurasia, Central Asia, and Russia. Maybe for political reasons, today many of the countries of Central Asia would like to emphasize their distinctness rather than the linkages and bondage. The same, to some extent, is the case with South Asia. South Asia has a large civilizational, cultural contiguity, although it's a continent. I mean, the differences that are there in South Asia or within India can be compared to South America, Latin America, or Europe. But nevertheless, there is a certain civilizational linkage. But civilizational linkage is there, ideological is not there. Ideology is a recent phenomenon, is a modern phenomenon. So in modern times, many of the countries have tried to define their ideology, and to that extent they would like to redefine their civilization and history also in a different light. And that's why the differences occur. And that is at the root of problem in South Asia. Many of the countries, not just Pakistan, but many others also have other orientations, maybe towards Southeast Asia. All right, so that's the problem. But what will bind, or what are the prospects, or where China figures in all this? Now, China recently, this year, Xi Jinping traveled to Islamabad and he announced an investment of $45 billion in infrastructure and industrial sector of Pakistan. But how much of this will actually come through is still a moot point. China has announced large investment plans for Afghanistan, but not much has come about. So, and also don't forget that China has bigger stakes in India. Pearl of strings is there. But at the same time, China's trade with India is 80 billion as of now. and within 1 year it is projected to be around $100 billion, China-India trade. So for China, despite all the political differences, India is the ultimate destination, ultimate economic partner in South Asia. I mean in South Asia. The various TAPI or IPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, or India, Pakistan, Iran, Pakistan, India, these various pipeline projects, the ultimate destination will be India. Unless India joins in, these initiatives do not make much economic sense. India is 7 times bigger than Pakistan in GDP and in trade and economic terms. So ultimately, India cannot be excluded. Pakistan, to an extent, understands. Recently, last year, there was this agreement between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which will allow Afghan goods to come to India via Pakistan, but strangely, Pakistan would not allow Indian goods to go to Afghanistan via Pakistan. So it is one way, but this does not make economic sense or logic. Ultimately, Pakistan realizes and Pakistan will have to open up because of its own economic needs and requirements, because that is the only, it is almost a basket case, Pakistan. If they have to come out of it, the surest and the easiest way is to open up with India. As of now, in fact, many times they are trading goods and services through third countries. They will buy Indian wheat through some other country. It is ultimately India. It makes more economic sense. It will be easier and much cheaper to buy it directly from India. So the economic logic and sense will ultimately prevail. And the same logic that has been given since yesterday, that economic logic doesn't, which I don't really believe in, that economic logic is not there in the Eurasian Economic Union, and for how long political or geopolitical requirements or objectives will overrule economic logic. If you inverse the logic, here it is the economic logic which will further take South Asia towards greater integration and at a much slower pace. That I understand. In the case of Europe, there was a groundswell after the Second World War and the vast destruction among the people of Europe to come together, to somehow eliminate war, to establish permanent peace and stability. In South Asia, the initiative has been more top-down. I mean, young leaders of Benazir Bhutto, Rajiv Gandhi, and of course, military dictator of Bangladesh, Ershad. It was his initiative. But there is, in fact, there is a People's SARC. There is a Writers' Union of SARC. And just now, there was an Ajoka theatre from Pakistan which had come to India. They came to JNU. And there is, among the people, there is a desire. They are still not very clear, but there is a desire. And people like my friend from Afghanistan was saying that how he can understand my language, Urdu or Hindustani, he talked to me. So there are these linkages. Bollywood, even in Central Asia, I don't know why Central Asians are now not so enthusiastic about Bollywood. This is what unites this whole region, including Central Asia. So economic logic and certain civilizational link of the past, which is there here also, and which is there in South Asia, that will ultimately, I believe, prevail. And recent political, geopolitical, ideological constraints will finally wither away. That is my understanding. Thank you very much.
Thank you for question. Actually, Professor Pandey mentioned some part. Yes, there is a, first let me start from one of his point and also it's a little bit contradict. Yes, there is a common, there is a Eurasian concept, but this is not the common. This is a Russian version, Kazakh version, and even Turkish version right now in Turkey also mentioning. The one which he mentioned about Olcay Süleymanov's idea, and also more is the Süleymanov taking idea from Lev Gumiliev. The basic on the ethnogenesis, the Slavs, Slavs and Turks tribes sharing this certain same territory. So then they had interaction that make them to more easily to cooperate and to share and have certain common and share ideas. But this idea is there, but is not the main elites accepted. So that's the problematic. This is why, for that reason, this kind of the idea should also supported by the economic logic, economic interest of the certain group. Yes, Eurasian Economic Union already established, but this is state-led organization, and if this organization doesn't have the bottom-up support, the support coming the social, economic, and political interest group, and also elites, then it be really functional or not, which is the question mark. Because as you know, from 1990s until this time, how many organizations they established, and they didn't function what they expected. The people who established it, decision makers. So for that reason, to Eurasian Economic Union, or Putin preferred to have the political union at the end, have a certain problem which is need to overcome. Like you mentioned, Crimea issue is creating another bloc and make even some of the Eurasian Economic Union, member of the Eurasian Economic Union, Kazakhstan, afraid what is the Russian real goal. So which is Diana's presentation, these Central Asian countries, some of them is not their economic interest, but they also have a security feeling threat, which in international relations we say bandwagoning. So to overcome that threat, they basically bandwagoning to Russia in that sense.
Okay. So we'll take a few more questions. You first, then Gerard, and then Seed. You've had your hand up for a long time. And the lady in the back also. And please keep them short. So was that there?
Yeah, for Yasa, I find this policy bottom-up demands interesting, as you know, the way the European Union developed took many very surprising paths, and one of the channels really that resulted in the kind of development that we have seen is an obscure clause in the European law, which gives the European Court jurisdiction in all cases where some company feels put at a disadvantage in trading with a partner country. Members of the European Union had quite protectionist tendencies to start with, but because of that clause, companies basically could cut back regulation in countries like France. Now, can you see anything similar happen within the Eurasian Union, where we have mainly these state capitalist companies operating? So, do you think that these kind of companies could play a similar role and push their agenda? Could you see a similar role of the court of the Eurasian Union, which probably has been shaped according to the European court, but is of course provided by countries which don't have a great history in independent judiciaries? So,
there's no. Okay. Very easily. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Shall we take some more questions? Yeah. Please.
Давай, Жулика, You work in the National University, so you know somehow local context.
I've been in more than 10 years lived in Kyrgyzstan, but recently moved out.
So in Kyrgyzstan, you in the last slide, you were talking about ideological patterns. And I would like to kind of remember Diana's presentation about the generations. And Kyrgyzstan is kind of more younger generation, but there is still a generation from the USSR who are remembering the past, and kind of this is the ideological patterns. But from other side, we can see there's a new generation. And from one side, new generation is legal migrants to Russia. From other side, they are kind of may face some ethnicities and may face some religious aspects. From one side, we see there's economic interest. From other side, ideological difference. And what do you think? How possible? Whether it will stay the same, and if it will be considered as an ideological pattern, commonalities, or in a year or some of the years it will be contradictory.
Okay.
Seyit Bey?
Yeah, I have maybe
Behind.
the same question. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question to Mr. Yasar Sari. According to the theories of international organizations, integration and cooperation, integration will have success if the states with the same culture, with the same political systems and regimes, and the same level of economic development.
Not the same economic development, at least have the same economic model which they want to follow. Because
in case of Eurasian Economic Union, we don't, maybe personal, I don't see anything of that. It's different cultures, different political regimes, different economic levels of development. And I wanted to know your opinion. Will it collapse, or it's a new model of integration, or it's just not an integration regional, it's just created and maintained by one personality like Putin?
Okay, maybe one more question? If, okay then.
Me? Okay. First question. First, nation state in Europe voluntarily give up some of their authority to a supranational institution and the European Union institution. So that make those economic groups, interest groups to going to, for example, one of the institutions is the court, European Union Court. And that they can go over the court and they take the decision, and those European Union member state has to oblige decision of the court. As we know, in post-Soviet countries, they don't have independent court. This is coming the Soviet background and legacy of the past. Soviet and even the past before the Soviet too. Central Asia, we can say that one. So then in Eurasian Economic Union, inside of Eurasian Economic Union, capitalist interest, state economic companies like the Gazprom, you cannot separate Gazprom interest from the state interest. So then, it's very simple to ask, they cannot have, the similar kind of court system or institution which is the solve the problem among those member countries or the companies from different member countries. So that's the second is the ideological patterns. Yes, there is a division between the old elite and emerging new generation. So, but the old elite still is ruling elite, not the just observing. And we don't know the new generation. They will be part of the ruling elite, or let's take the Kyrgyzstan example, those new elite trying to leave the country and go somewhere in the world. Religious ethnicity emphasized. Why? Because these countries, including Kyrgyzstan example, I can tell because we did two projects, which one is the related religious, the other is the ethnicity. The religious ethnicity is emphasized by the both ruling elite and a certain level is a public too. So create a different identity from others. This is including the regional countries where they have similar religious understanding on a similar certain level ethnicity also close each other. In this pattern, if you look to this pattern itself cannot explain. But if this pattern is also parallel with the economic interests, then the changes can happen. And of course, the changes in society and state level will not happen within short time. We are talking about generation. The average is the one generation 25 years, so it takes at least 25 years. For that reason, very important for Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, what will happen after Nazarbayev and Kerimov die, because they led their countries more than 25 years, almost, more than. The other one is the question is today what we have Eurasian Economic Union is the state-led organization. This is not just Putin's idea. This is the main ruling elite in Russia also prefer this one. This is sometimes, of course, we can approach this subject two ways. Some say that Russian using kind of a neo-imperialistic way. What is the neo-imperialistic way? The old imperialists, they occupy the land and they control the country. A neo-imperialist way is to control the more important area. What is the security, collective security treaty organization, and economic issue, Eurasian Economic Union. That way control the countries which is one time was part of the Soviet Union. Especially Western scholars are mentioning that one. The other is saying that, okay, this is state-led organization, and when those states and the ruling, the elite which is ruling those states, lose their interest, and seeing that this organization is kind of problematic, problem in their shoulder, then they will ignore the organization, and they will that organization will die. Look until this time how many organizations established by the post-Soviet countries.
We have time for a couple more questions. Yes. So you first, and then Batim.
Just not a question, a comment. Is the EU sui generis, and I read the same article comparing EU and ASEAN, and maybe comment maybe on somebody's questions. Is that maybe ASEAN is a good example or better comparison for Eurasian Economic Union rather than EU? So because there, in ASEAN, national interest comes first, and they are not very ambitious in terms of forming any supranational institutions.
Political organizations.
Political organizations, so they are only emphasizing economics, and it's not customs union, just free trade agreement. And even when we call our Eurasian Economic Union as a union, like strictly in economic sense, it's only on customs union stage.
Yeah.
Or even customs union with a lot of reservations. So it's kind of advanced free trade agreement, which we call, not customs union. Only difference when it has only internal tariff. We are not a union, so to say. It's a fancy word to say that it's a union. It's more like an ASEAN case. It's more similar to ASEAN rather than Europe. EU case is very different.
Okay, Batim.
I would have more of a comment than a question, like a debate. You have stated in your last answer to my question, bottom-up principle. I would like to challenge it directly. It sometimes looks that some principles very popular. I understand that it's important, but still, for example, we have such examples like Fukuyama end of history. It's very popular, which didn't come.
Which Fukuyama himself is saying, sorry, I failed.
But
Kuyam also, say that, I was wrong, so sorry.
Yeah, so he understood that he was wrong.
Yeah.
Then, for example, liberal economic model, because sometimes, for example, such organizations as International Monetary Fund, it's very popular to say that liberal economic model is appropriate everywhere. It doesn't depend in which specifics. So bottom-up principle sometimes may be challengeable, I think. And then we go to the specifics of post-Soviet area. And also we can remember the principle of democratization. For example, it's also saying that democratization is more possible with bottom-up principle. And is it possible with top-down principle? I think it's possible. And if we then go again to the post-Soviet area, I think top-down principle in post-Soviet area is really appropriate. And that's why integration happens also in post-Soviet area, because top-down principle here works, I think. Maybe you don't agree, but this is a question for debate. And also, some challenge you mentioned, maybe if I was clear with your idea, that Putin wants, in perspective, would like to make Eurasian Economic Union as a political also union. But now I could say that even Europe today understands that they need political union. They came to the line when they have to make a progress. And if they not federalize, they understand that they may lose in future competitive world. So political integration is maybe not just the wish of Putin, it's a necessity in today's global competition. So what I want to say is that integration is possible is possible in different regions, and it's possible on different principles. And if there is no Western conditions, EU conditions for Eurasian integration, it doesn't mean from my point of view that integration is not possible in Eurasia. Maybe in some different way, but still, the perspective exists, and we could let ourselves expect that something will come, then expect that it will lose.
I will add the small things. You are right, top-down principle only can success if that top-down create a spillover effect back to bottom. So to initiate or energize the economic, social, and political groups see mutual and common interest, then top-down effect may work. But it's not guaranteed. But if it is bottom-up spillover effect, is more comparatively top-down effect is more easy to happen. So.
Perhaps just very briefly, because we don't want to steal time from lunch.
I just wanted to emphasize that in each case of regional integration has its own distinct logic and historical reasons. So in case of Europe, civilizational linkages and all that apart, there was a strong overwhelming desire on the part of the people and governments in Europe to come together so that some of the things that happened in the past did not occur again. In case of ASEAN, it was slightly different. In fact, there was, to some extent, a common threat. Communist China, at that time, 60s and 70s, a communist China. Communist attempts in Indonesia. So that was, and then there was also an external factor. There was prodding and persuasion on the part of United States to come together. Later on, they discovered ASEAN way. Later on, economic logic was there, but not so much initially. It came later. ASEAN way as the common uniting principle came later. So in each case, things may follow different paths and unique models. There need not be a single reason or logic for all regional integrations. In Eurasia, you can, with time, it may evolve. There are already certain things. So I would not agree with the fact that it is only one man's ambition or objective. There is more to it. There is also a desire on the part of other countries or other member states for their own very specific reasons maybe. And with passage of time, there may emerge more reasons and logic to come or stay together.
Okay. I would like to thank all the panelists for their contributions and the audience for their active participation. In 1 minute, if I were to summarize this panel, we had contributions that looked kind of beyond the borders of the Eurasian Economic Union to other regions, the adjacent places, and looked at the question of regional integration in general. So is it a process that can be kind of reproducible across the regions? So we looked at different models, European Union model, the South Asian model, the failures, the successes. What I observed also is that there seems to be a kind of a teleological logic to this integration process, as if integration is necessarily something that has to happen, and there's a kind of a relentless economic logic that drives that process. And if we look from the political economy perspective, then what perhaps is also worth exploring is the global dynamic of the core and periphery. So if we have, for example, a situation where the former core and the periphery, the metropolitan areas integrate the former, also again, if we call them colonies, how does that model work? Or if it's just periphery to periphery integration, does that make a difference? And also, if we also bear in mind that regions are constructs as much as they are objective reality, and if we go back again to the history of how Europe was constructed, was very much through its opposition to the Orient, and exactly my point. So, again, in the conditions of the globalized world, and we know Central Asia, the states in the region gain independence under the conditions of accelerating globalization, then can we even still talk about, sovereign states as such? Is it, as Dina mentioned yesterday, the end of Westphalia? Does it make sense to talk about some kind of global assemblages and forms of deterritorialized statehood, right? As, for example, John Hathershaw and colleagues recently published an issue of Central Asian Survey where they talk about offshore Central Asia and how the states in the region are very much integrated into the global politics and economy through all kinds of global schemes that go beyond this logic of states and regions. So these are all questions that are worth exploring and debating.